You're fired. Pack your things and leave, now. The words hit Rachel like a brick wall. She stood frozen in the hallway as the hospital director's voice echoed off the sterile walls, disbelief washing over her. Just earlier that day, she had put everything on the line to save the life of a dying veteran. And now? She was out of a job, her entire career in ruins. Later that evening, as she sat numbly on her couch, drowning in the weight of what had happened, the unmistakable sound of engines broke the silence. Four sleek, luxury cars pulled up outside her building. Who were they? And what could they possibly want with her? Would you put your livelihood on the line for a stranger? Keep reading, because the truth that unfolds will leave you speechless. The buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead hummed as Rachel Bennett wrapped up another long night shift at Memorial Hospital. After 15 years in trauma nursing, she had perfected the art of moving quickly and with precision, making her final rounds before handing things off to the next shift. Now 38, Rachel wore her experience in strands of silver woven through her ponytail, evidence of the many long, grueling nights she'd weathered. Mrs. Rodriguez's fever finally broke, she told the incoming nurse, offering a clipboard arranged with care and detail. And Mr. Dawson needs his pain meds at exactly 8 a.m., not 8:30 like the chart says. He won't complain, but you can tell he's hurting just by looking at him. That was Rachel's talent, reading between the lines. She didn't just monitor vitals, she caught the tiny, overlooked cues that often spelled the difference between recovery and tragedy. Her colleagues called it a sixth sense. Administration, however, saw it as deviating from protocol. As she made her way toward the staff lounge, Rachel spotted Dr. Ahmed waving her over. His expression was tight, serious. Behind him stood Karen from HR, and flanking them was the new administrator, Mr. Langston, an MBA type who had already slashed patient stays and limited medication options in his quest to cut costs. "Rachel, would you come with us to conference room B?" Karen said, her voice overly sweet, painfully fake. Inside, the air felt colder than it should have. Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, a worn, chipped piece with "Nurses Save Lives" fading across the front. A thank you gift from a family she once helped, 5 years ago. "Yesterday, you administered Cardiozym to Mr. Hansen," Mr. Langston began flatly, skipping any pleasantries. "That drug isn't approved under our updated formulary." Rachel straightened her back. He was showing early signs of cardiac distress. Considering his history with arrhythmia. "Our protocol is quite clear," Langston cut in, sliding a printout across the table. "You observe, document, and wait for symptoms to meet standard criteria before treatment." Rachel's voice sharpened. "And risk losing him in the meantime? He's 78, with chronic heart failure. I trusted my clinical judgment." "You don't have that authority anymore," Langston said, cutting her off. "We now follow a standardized care model." Dr. Ahmed lowered his gaze to his hands, silent. The silence in the room said more than any words could. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately," Karen added gently, pushing a manila envelope across the table. Rachel felt the world tilt under her feet. 15 years. Thousands of patients. Dozens of lives pulled back from the edge. "I've never lost a patient when it was in my power to prevent it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I wasn't about to start now." "Your commitment is noted," Langston responded coldly. "But policies are in place for a reason." Roughly 20 minutes later, Rachel stood alone in the hospital parking lot, clutching a cardboard box holding the pieces of her career, a photo of her parents, a backup pair of scrubs, and the thank you notes she'd held onto over the years. As she drove home through the drizzle, rain traced down her windshield, mirroring the tears streaking her face. The apartment that already strained her nurse's salary now loomed like a financial anchor. And the dream she'd poured herself into, starting a clinic for those most in need, felt impossibly far away. A fantasy turned cruel. She tried to call her aunt, her only remaining family, but her phone died mid-ring, just another small thing slipping through her fingers. With nothing but the murmur of rain for company, Rachel veered off her usual route and took Old Mill Road, hoping to avoid the crush of rush hour. Her wipers struggled to keep pace with the downpour. That's when she saw it, a vehicle pulled off awkwardly on the shoulder, hazard lights barely blinking through the storm. Her training kicked in before she could think. Rachel pulled over without hesitation, reaching for her phone out of reflex, only to remember it was dead. Rain soaked through her scrubs as she approached the car, an older sedan, paint dulled with age, a fading "Support Our Troops" magnet clinging to its bumper. Inside, an elderly man was slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. "Sir. Can you hear me?" Rachel knocked hard on the window, then tried the door handle. It opened easily. The overhead light came on, revealing a man likely in his 70s. His skin was pale, lips tinged blue. A Vietnam veteran's cap lay on the floor by his feet. His breathing was shallow, his skin clammy, textbook early cardiac arrest. Rachel had no gear. No stethoscope. No meds. No defibrillator. Everything she'd relied on just hours earlier was gone. But her hands still knew exactly what to do. She carefully shifted the man's weight, easing him over into the passenger seat to make room to work. As she moved his arm with gentle precision, the dim light caught on the gold wedding band circling his finger. "I'm a nurse," she told him softly, though the words felt shaky now, uncertain. "I'm going to help you." Without hesitating, she began chest compressions, falling into the familiar rhythm that had become instinct after so many years in emergency medicine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As she pressed down with both hands, something tumbled from the man's jacket. His wallet. A military ID card slipped out and landed on the seat. Thomas Avery. Age 72. "Hang in there, Thomas," Rachel urged, her voice tight with focus as she kept going. "You're not leaving on my watch, not today." Minutes ticked by. First 5. Then 10. Her arms were on fire, muscles screaming with effort, but she refused to stop. She knew she was technically committing a crime now, practicing medicine without a license. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd just been fired for breaking a rule to save someone, and now here she was, breaking even more rules, for the same reason. At the 15-minute mark, a pair of headlights appeared on the road. Still pumping with one hand, Rachel waved frantically with the other. A car slowed, then pulled over. A young couple climbed out, stunned by what they were seeing. "Call 911. Rachel shouted over the pounding rain. "Tell them we have a man in his 70s, cardiac arrest." The guy pulled out his phone and called immediately. Moments later, he looked up, his expression grim. "The dispatcher says it's gonna be at least half an hour before help gets here," he said. "There's been a major accident on the highway." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Then we're taking him ourselves. Memorial's 15 minutes out if we move fast." The woman blinked. Will he make it?" "Not if we stand here waiting," Rachel said, her voice steely. The sedan tore through the storm, tires hissing against wet asphalt. Tyler focused on driving while his wife, Grace, turned in her seat, doing her best to help Rachel continue CPR in the tight back seat. "Name's Rachel, by the way," she managed to say, catching her breath between compressions. "Tyler. And this is Grace," the young man replied without taking his eyes off the road. "Just tell us what else to do." Rachel's eyes caught a small pill container that had fallen near Thomas's side. She grabbed it. "He's diabetic," she said, recognizing the medication label. "That complicates things." They were just minutes from the hospital when Thomas suddenly went still. His breathing stopped altogether. Rachel immediately tilted his head back, gave 2 rescue breaths, then jumped back into compressions. Her arms felt like they were made of concrete, her spine throbbing, but she didn't pause. "Come on, Thomas," she said, breathless. "I already lost my job today." I'm not losing you too. His wallet lay open beside her, revealing an old photograph, four young men in military uniforms standing tall beside him, each with the same steady gaze and proud stance. His sons, maybe. Beneath it was a note, worn with time and stained with age. Come home safe, my hero. Love, Mary. Your family needs you. Rachel grit her teeth, fighting tears. Mary still needs you, Thomas, she said through clenched teeth. So keep fighting. And for a second, barely noticeable, his eyelids flickered. A flicker of life. The glowing lights of the hospital emergency entrance came into view, the same door Rachel had exited hours ago in humiliation. Now she was back, not as an employee, but as a woman trying to save a stranger's life, willing to throw every rule out the window if it meant giving him a chance. What she didn't realize was that Thomas Avery wasn't just some random veteran. And those young men in the photo? They weren't ordinary soldiers. By stopping on that lonely road, Rachel had unknowingly set a chain of events into motion, one that would soon come full circle in ways she could never have anticipated. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting him through those doors alive. I need a crash cart and a cardiac team, now. Rachel yelled as Tyler helped her push Thomas into the ER. Her scrubs, still soaked from earlier, gave her the appearance of someone on duty, even though she wasn't. The weekend team, faces she didn't recognize, jumped into action, too focused on the crisis to stop and ask questions. One of the nurses reached out to check Thomas's pulse, but Rachel didn't stop her compressions for even a second. Cardiac arrest, approximately 35 minutes, she reported mechanically. Possible diabetic, unknown meds. No treatment administered in the field. CPR maintained continuously since I found him. Dr. Harlow, the attending physician on shift, rushed over and took position beside her. We'll take it from here, he said, then paused as his eyes locked onto hers. Rachel? Weren't you just fired, she said flatly, not missing a beat. Doesn't matter right now. His name's Thomas Avery. Vietnam vet. Early 70s. The trauma team swiftly moved Thomas into a trauma bay, taking over the procedure with practiced efficiency. Rachel stepped back, suddenly noticing just how soaked her scrubs were, how her arms trembled with fatigue, and how the weight of nearly 24 sleepless hours was crashing down on her all at once. Rachel Bennett. The voice sliced through her fog like a knife. She turned to see Mr. Langston standing at the nurse's station, his expression a volatile mix of disbelief and fury. You don't work here anymore, he said sharply. You are not authorized to perform medical procedures in this hospital. Before Rachel could respond, Grace stepped in front of her. She saved that man's life, she said, her voice rising. He wouldn't be alive if she hadn't done something. Langston's tone remained cold, unbothered. That may be, but what she did was unauthorized. I'll have to report this to the medical board. The injustice hit Rachel like a gut punch. Her knees nearly buckled now that the adrenaline was draining from her body. She'd lost her job, maybe her entire future in medicine, and now she might face legal action. And all of it, for doing exactly what she was trained to do, save someone's life. Tyler stepped up, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. We were there, he said, voice firm. We saw everything. This woman is a hero. Just then, Dr. Harlow emerged from the trauma bay. His face gave away nothing. Rachel, could I speak with you privately? He asked. Her heart dropped. This was it, Thomas hadn't made it. Everything she'd done had been for nothing. In a small consultation room, Dr. Harlow sat across from her. Thomas went into cardiac arrest again during treatment, he said, his voice heavy. Rachel shut her eyes, bracing herself. But we stabilized him, he added. He's not out of danger, but he's holding on. A tidal wave of relief hit her so hard, she had to grip the sides of the chair to stay upright. Thank you, she breathed, barely audible. Dr. Harlow shook his head. No, thank you, Rachel. There's no way the paramedics would have made it in time. What you did out there gave him a fighting chance. He paused, then added, that said, Langston isn't wrong about one thing. You're no longer employed here. I can't let you stay in the treatment areas. The word stung. Even in victory, the loss was still real. Rachel simply nodded and left the room without protest. She returned to the public waiting area, where Tyler and Grace sat watching the entrance anxiously. He's alive, Rachel told them. For now. Grace shot up and hugged her tightly. You were incredible back there. Rachel started to give her usual reply, just doing my job, but stopped midway. My former job, she corrected with a faint, tired smile. Tyler and Grace insisted on treating her to coffee from the hospital cafeteria. As they sat together, Rachel learned more about the young couple. Grace taught middle school, and Tyler was just about to begin med school. What you did today, Tyler said with quiet intensity, that's the kind of doctor I want to be. Someone who puts the patient first. No matter what the system says. Rachel smiled, worn out but moved. Just make sure you don't get fired for it, she said, half joking, half warning. As night settled in, the couple finally stood to leave. Before going, they exchanged numbers with Rachel and made her promise to keep them updated on Thomas's condition. Left alone once again in the waiting room, Rachel sat with the full weight of everything finally pressing down on her. No job. No income. And maybe, no future in the only field she'd ever known. As the clock inched toward midnight, someone familiar approached. It was Lisa, a cardiology nurse Rachel had worked with for years. Rachel, she asked gently. Why are you still here? I'm waiting on a patient, Rachel replied. Thomas Avery. Lisa's expression softened instantly. The vet? He's in ICU. Stable for now. She paused, then added, he was conscious for a little while. Kept asking about the angel who saved him. Rachel's throat tightened. I just did what anyone would do. Lisa shook her head. No. Not just anyone would have done what you did. She leaned in, her voice low. We heard what happened with Langston. It's not right. A lot of the staff are talking. Many of us are. Suddenly, a disruption at the entrance cut her off. Four men walked into the waiting room. Though dressed in civilian clothes, everything about them, from their posture to their focus, screamed military. They spoke briefly to the receptionist, who then turned and pointed directly at Rachel. As the four men made their way toward her, hospital security appeared at the opposite entrance, clearly summoned by Langston, likely to escort Rachel off the property for good. Are you Rachel Bennett? The oldest man asked, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed. I am, she replied, her exhaustion too deep for fear. You were with Thomas Avery earlier this evening? Behind him, the security officers hovered uncertainly, watching the exchange unfold. These are my brothers, the man continued, nodding toward the three men standing beside him. Anthony, Brian, and Sean. We got on the first flight the moment we were contacted. I'm Major Marcus Avery. Thomas Avery is our father. Rachel blinked, caught off guard. Her confusion must have been written all over her face. The security team inched closer, seemingly preparing to intervene. Ms. Bennett, the head of security began cautiously, Mr. Langston has instructed us to ask you to leave the premises immediately. Major Avery squared his shoulders, his posture straightening slightly, his voice firm but composed. And you are? Hospital security, sir. This individual no longer has employment status here and isn't permitted to. This individual, Anthony Avery cut in, stepping forward, just saved our father's life tonight. He locked eyes with the guards. Perhaps you're not aware of exactly who Thomas Avery is. The security team exchanged nervous glances. Sir, we're just following hospital protocol. Protocol, Sean repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. Is that the same protocol that got Ms. Bennett fired for administering life-saving care? Rachel's eyes widened. How do you know about that? We have connections on the hospital board, Brian explained. Our father's foundation provides a significant amount of funding to hospitals throughout the region, including this one. In that moment, it all clicked into place in Rachel's exhausted mind. The Avery Veterans Healthcare Foundation. That Thomas Avery. Marcus gave a solemn nod. Our father started it after returning home from Vietnam. He spent his life fighting to make sure veterans get the care they deserve. He turned back to the guards. You might want to let Mr. Langston know that the chairman of this hospital's largest donor foundation is currently in your ICU, alive solely because of Ms. Bennett. That was all it took. The guards backed away immediately, eager to avoid becoming part of the fallout. Rachel slumped into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Of course she knew the Avery Foundation, anyone in healthcare did. It was legendary for transforming how veterans were treated, known across the country for its enormous contributions to hospitals and research programs. We'd like to speak with the hospital administrator, Marcus said, calm but commanding. Now. It didn't take long for Langston to appear, his confident mask replaced by a nervous, too wide smile the moment he spotted the Avery brothers. Gentlemen, he said quickly. I wasn't aware Mr. Avery was your father. Please know he's receiving the best possible care. Spare us, Anthony said curtly. We're here to discuss why you fired the nurse who saved our father's life. Langston went pale. There are protocols we must follow. Exactly, Brian interrupted. And it's funny you bring that up. The Avery Foundation's grant to Memorial Hospital specifically covered the cardiozym that Rachel administered yesterday. The very decision you fired her for, Marcus added. I had no idea. Obviously, Marcus replied, his voice sharp and cold. Brian stepped in again. And we've also discovered that your cost-cutting policies have directly undermined the kind of medication access our funding was intended to preserve. Sean, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Our dad founded this organization with one belief at its core: medical choices should be made by doctors and nurses, not number crunchers with spreadsheets. Langston swallowed hard, visibly sweating. Maybe there's been some sort of misunderstanding. There's no confusion here, Marcus said firmly. We'll be speaking with the hospital board first thing in the morning. Then he turned to Rachel. In the meantime, we'd like a word with Ms. Bennett, if she's open to it. All eyes turned toward her. It felt like she was caught inside a dream, watching someone else live it. Yes, she said at last. Of course. In a quiet consultation room, far from Langston's hovering presence, the Avery brothers sat down with Rachel to talk. They explained in more detail who their father really was. Thomas Avery had played a key role in shaping many of the healthcare protocols now used in veteran treatment centers across the country. His foundation funded everything from clinical research and veteran scholarships to hands-on care initiatives. When he came to briefly, Marcus said, he told the nurses about an angel who kept him going. Said she reminded him of what medicine is supposed to look like. Rachel blinked back tears she hadn't expected. I just did what anyone else would have done. No, Anthony said gently, you didn't. That's exactly the issue. In a system that's more focused on ticking boxes and following the money, you chose the patient. That's what our fathers always believed in. Brian leaned forward, his tone more serious now. Rachel, we're looking for someone like you at the foundation. Her brows drew together. What do you mean? We've been trying to fill a director of nursing standards position, he explained. Someone who can oversee patient care policies across our partner hospitals and ensure we're still putting people ahead of processes. Rachel stared at them, stunned. You want to hire me? You don't even know who I am. Sean smiled faintly. We know what matters. And our dad's a phenomenal judge of character. Always has been. Marcus added, and this role would give you real power, to improve care, shape policy, and advocate for nurses and patients on a larger scale. Not just talk about what's broken. Change it. As they continued discussing the opportunity, Rachel felt a flicker deep inside her, something she hadn't felt since the moment she was fired. Hope. Not just for herself, but for the vision she'd always carried, that healthcare should be about compassion first, procedure second. What had started as the worst day of her professional life was quietly, miraculously becoming something else entirely. The beginning of something she hadn't dared to dream. And Thomas Avery, the stranger whose life she'd fought so hard to save, might just be the one to save hers in return. Exactly 24 hours later, Rachel stood at her apartment window, unable to believe what she was seeing. Outside her modest building, four luxury vehicles pulled up in a neat line. Curtains twitched as curious neighbors peered through their windows, watching the Avery brothers step out, each carrying documents and neatly wrapped gift bags. Once they were settled in her cozy living room, Marcus turned to her. "So," he asked, "have you made a decision?" The contrast between their finely tailored suits and her lived-in space should have felt awkward, but their warmth and easy presence quickly dissolved any tension. "I have, a few conditions," Rachel said, surprising even herself with the confidence in her voice. Anthony raised an eyebrow. "We're all ears." "First," she began, "the Foundation's nursing protocols need to allow space for clinical judgment. Standardization is important, but so is recognizing that every patient is unique. I want to develop guidelines that reflect that." Brian nodded immediately, his approval clear. "Dad will definitely appreciate that. And I want to create a scholarship program," Rachel continued. "For nurses who go above and beyond. The ones who stand up for their patients, even when it means risking their position." "Consider it done," Marcus replied without skipping a beat. "Anything else?" Rachel inhaled deeply. "I'd like the first community clinic project to be built here, in this neighborhood. Too many families here go without care, either because they can't afford it or because the system is too difficult to navigate." Sean smiled, visibly impressed. "You've clearly been thinking about this for a while." "I have," Rachel admitted. "For years, actually. I just never had the means to do anything about it." "Well," Marcus said, offering his hand, "now you do. Welcome to the Avery Foundation, Rachel." As they shook on it, Anthony passed her an envelope. "This is from our father. He made sure we delivered it personally." Inside, she found a handwritten note, scrawled on hospital stationery. "Some angels don't wear wings. They wear scrubs. Thank you for reminding me why I started this fight all those years ago. There's always a place for healers who put people first. Thomas Avery." Beneath the note sat a check made out in her name, a signing bonus large enough to cover her rent for the next year. "He's doing well," Brian said gently, noticing the tears gathering in her eyes. "Already charming the nurses. Complaining about his low-sodium meals. And he'd really like to meet you again," Marcus added. "He's been talking about his angel non-stop." As the conversation turned to the next steps of her new role, Rachel couldn't help but reflect on just how dramatically life had shifted. 2 days ago, she had been at rock bottom, her career shattered for making a compassionate choice. Now, she was being offered the chance to redefine nursing care across the country. 3 months later, Rachel stood shoulder to shoulder with Thomas Avery at the groundbreaking ceremony for their very first community clinic. Fully recovered, Thomas looked radiant with pride as Rachel stepped forward to address the crowd. Community leaders, healthcare professionals, and press had gathered, and in the front rows sat Tyler and Grace, now proud recipients of the first Avery Foundation Medical Education Scholarships. "Healthcare isn't just about rules and routines," Rachel said, her voice ringing out over the microphone. "It's about recognizing people, truly seeing them, in their most vulnerable moments, and choosing to stand by them." She paused, letting the words sink in. Sometimes that means breaking the rules. Sometimes it means taking risks. And more often than not, it means trusting your gut. Thomas stood beside her, nodding silently, leaning on a cane etched with his military insignia. This clinic represents something new, she continued. A model of care that blends modern medicine with the timeless values of empathy and human connection. Her eyes swept over the Avery brothers, watching proudly from the front row. And it proves something else too, she said, smiling now. Sometimes, when one door slams shut, it's only because a whole new building is waiting to be opened. The crowd erupted into applause as Thomas stepped forward and took hold of the ceremonial scissors. With a steady hand honed by years of service, he cut the ribbon, officially launching the first of what would grow into a national network of community clinics, all under Rachel's leadership. Later, as the celebration buzzed around her, Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from Lisa, her former colleague back at Memorial. Langston resigned today. New leadership's already reviewing the protocols you stood up against. You sparked something bigger than you know. Rachel smiled at the screen, her heart full. She gazed out across the field where families chatted with volunteers, children laughed under tents, and donors shook hands with the first class of scholarship recipients. And at the center of it all stood Thomas Avery, surrounded by his sons, laughing, sharing stories, and living proof of what one act of courage could set in motion. What began as the darkest day of her career had become her greatest opportunity to create lasting change. Sometimes, doing the right thing costs you everything. And sometimes, it gives you back more than you ever dreamed possible. Have you ever had a moment where everything seemed to fall apart, only to become the start of something better? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. I'll personally reply to the ones that move me most. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss our next story about everyday heroes doing extraordinary things.